You open the mailbox, and there it is. A bill you didn't expect. A number that makes your stomach drop before you've even finished reading it. In that half second, before a single conscious thought forms, something in you has already reacted, and that reaction has started setting the tone for the rest of your day. Right now, almost everyone on this planet responds to that half second the exact same way, as if the bill, the diagnosis, the phone call, the closed door were the whole story. 99% of humanity is living inside that reaction, convinced the world is fixed, and they are simply the ones it happens to. But a very small number of people, call it 1%, have crossed into something different. There's a name for it: the God state. The state where you stop reacting to your life and start authoring it. Physicists studying the observer effect found the same principle from a different angle. Reality responds to how it's observed. Step into it, and everything changes. I am not talking about positive thinking. I am talking about a shift so complete that your attention, your body, and the reality forming around you begin operating on entirely different terms. And once you see it clearly, you don't go back to reading that bill the way you used to. So here is the real question, hiding inside that mailbox moment. What if the number was never in charge? What if you were, and no one ever told you? That is exactly where we start. Most people don't wake up. Not really. Their eyes open, and within seconds, before the body has even left the bed, the thumb is already moving toward the phone. The news loads first. The weather loads second. A message from someone who needs something loads third. And by the time both feet touch the floor, the entire emotional tone of the day has already been set by 3 or 4 things that happened somewhere else, to someone else, and had absolutely nothing to do with the life waiting in that room. None of this is a character flaw. It is not laziness, and it is not weakness. It's what happens when a person has never been told that reality behaves differently depending on who is looking at it, and how. Notice the pattern almost no one names directly. 99% of people move through their entire lives treating the world as something that has already been decided. Fixed, finished. Waiting to be discovered. The way you discover the ending of a movie someone else wrote. Money feels fixed. There's only so much, and it moves toward other people more than it moves toward you. Time feels fixed. There's never enough of it, and what's left is running out faster every year. Circumstances feel fixed. The marriage is what it is. The health is what it is. The career is what it is. And whatever thought passes through the mind about any of it gets treated as a private little reaction, a comment on a reality that was already locked in before the thought ever showed up. If you lined up 100 people who feel exactly this way, 99 of them are, right now, nodding along with this description, recognizing pieces of their own morning, their own bank account, their own tired sigh at the ringing phone. And one of them is about to do something different with what they hear in the next few minutes. Not because that one person is smarter or luckier or somehow chosen, because that one person is about to understand something the other 99 were simply never shown. The world is not something that happens to you and then, afterward, you think about it. The world responds to how it's being observed. That's not a hopeful phrase from a self-help book. It's a description of how observation works, and it changes everything about what a thought is for. The 99% believe thought is a passenger, something that rides along behind events, commenting on them after the fact. The bill arrives, and then the worry arrives. The diagnosis arrives, and then the fear arrives. The silence from someone you love arrives, and then the story about what it means arrives. In that order, always in that order, thought never gets to go first. But there's a version of this life happening in parallel, right now, for the small number of people who realize something. 99% haven't questioned. What if you don't have to wait for the event to know how you're going to observe it? What if the observing could come first? Nobody tells the 99% this, mostly because nobody who taught them understood it either. Not their parents, not their bosses, not the well-meaning voices that told them to work harder, save more, and wait their turn. Every one of those voices was operating from the same fixed reality assumption, passing it down like a family recipe nobody ever questioned, because everyone around them was cooking the same thing. So let's start honestly, without shame attached to it. If your mornings start with the phone before your feet hit the floor, if your money feels like something that happens to you rather than something you direct, if your circumstances feel permanent in a way that makes new decisions feel pointless, you are not broken. You are running the operating system that 99% of humanity runs, the one built entirely around reacting to a reality assumed to be already finished. What almost nobody explains clearly is what it actually means to observe something into being, instead of just reacting to what already exists. That phrase is not decoration. It's description, the actual mechanism, and once you understand it, you can't unsee it in your own life. Picture a book sitting closed on a table. Every page inside it exists, technically, as ink already printed on paper. But the story, the actual experience of the story, doesn't exist yet for anyone until a hand opens the cover and a set of eyes moves across the first line. Before that moment, the book is potential. After that moment, it's an event. Nothing about the paper changed. What changed is that it was observed. Now take that same principle and shrink it down to the smallest scale physics has ever measured. Physicists running an experiment with particles moving through two narrow openings discovered something that still unsettles people who hear it for the first time. When nobody measured which opening a particle passed through, it behaved like a wave, spreading out, existing in a blur of possibility, showing up everywhere it could possibly be at once. But the instant someone set up a way to observe which path it took, that blur collapsed into one specific, definite location. The particle didn't have a fixed position until it was observed. The observing was part of what made the position real. This is the observer principle the God state rests on. The same law, echoed independently in the language of physics. The observer participates in what becomes real, the way opening a book participates in the story existing for you. The moment attention arrives, the potential becomes the event. Here's why this matters far beyond a laboratory. The 99% are observing all day, every day. They never stop. Watching the news, watching the bank balance, watching the clock, watching other people's lives scroll past on a screen. Observation isn't the rare skill here. Everyone does it constantly. What's rare is observing on purpose, with a direction chosen in advance, instead of observing by default, letting whatever's loudest decide where attention goes. Think about what that means for a single, ordinary day. A person checks the news first thing in the morning, and their attention lands, without any decision being made about it, on the worst 3 stories available. That's still observation. It's still shaping what becomes emotionally real for the next few hours. Nobody chose it on purpose. It simply happened, the way weather happens, because nobody was steering. The 1% discovered something the other 99 never questioned. If observing shapes what becomes real, then the obvious next move is to observe on purpose. Observe deliberately. Choose, before the day even starts, what you're going to give your attention to, and hold that choice the way you'd hold a book, open to a specific page, instead of letting the wind flip it to whatever page it lands on. This isn't positive thinking dressed up in bigger words. Positive thinking asks you to feel good about a reality you still believe is fixed. What's being said here is different. The reality isn't fixed in the way you were taught. It's closer to a field of possibility, and your attention, sustained, repeated, directed attention, is one of the forces that decides which possibility becomes the one you live inside. Most people never test this, because nobody ever told them observation was doing anything at all. They thought they were just watching. They didn't know they were choosing, by default, every single day, simply by pointing their attention at whatever showed up loudest and calling that paying attention to reality. Once you know you've been observing this entire time, that there was never a version of you who wasn't shaping something, the only honest question left is what all that unaimed observing has actually been costing you. Not in some abstract spiritual sense, in real mornings, real decisions, real money left on the table, because worry got there before choice did. That's where we're going next, because the cost is specific, and it's bigger than most people ever let themselves add up. The phone rings, and before a single word comes through the speaker, the stomach tightens. That reaction happens faster than thought. It happens before you know who's calling, before you know what they want, before there's any actual evidence of bad news at all. And here's what almost nobody stops to notice. If the body prepares for bad news before it has any information, then it's been rehearsing that exact response for a long time. Long enough that it doesn't need a reason anymore. It just needs a ringtone. That's what unaimed observation costs. Not in a vague, spiritual, someday sort of way. In specific, countable ways, across 3 areas of an ordinary life. Start with money. A person who has spent years bracing for bad news doesn't negotiate well, because negotiation requires believing there's room to ask for more, and bracing assumes there isn't. They don't raise their rate, apply for the role that's a stretch, or make the phone call to renegotiate a bill, because some part of them has already decided how it's going to go before they've dialed the number. The opportunity might be sitting right there. A client willing to pay more, a position that would suit them perfectly, and it gets passed by, quietly, not out of laziness, but because attention was busy scanning for the next threat and had no spare capacity left to notice an opening. Then there's connection. Someone who answers every unexpected call already flinching tends to carry that same flinch into ordinary conversations. A slightly delayed text gets read as rejection. A quiet evening with a spouse gets read as distance. An adult child who hasn't called in a few days gets read as a problem instead of simply a busy week. None of this is dramatic. It's small, constant, and it adds up. Because a nervous system braced for bad news treats neutral silence as evidence of something wrong and starts responding to imaginary threats with real tension, which the people closest to you can absolutely feel, even when you never say a word about it. And then there's the quieter cost, the one that doesn't show up on any statement. Opportunity itself. The right conversation, the right idea, the right person. These things tend to arrive disguised as something ordinary, easy to miss if attention is elsewhere. A person operating from constant bracing has attention parked on the exits, scanning for what might go wrong, which means the doors that are already opening go unnoticed. Not because the doors weren't there, because nobody was looking at them. None of this makes a person weak or foolish. It makes them exactly what they were trained to be by years of treating reality as something that happens to them. The body learned to brace the same way it learned to flinch at a loud sound, through repetition, not through choice. Nobody sits down one day and decides to fear the phone. It's built one flinch at a time, out of 1,000 ordinary moments where reacting felt like the only available option. But here's what makes this different from every other conversation about stress or anxiety you've probably already had. This isn't about calming down. It's not about breathing exercises or managing symptoms so the bracing hurts a little less. Most people stop right there. They see the cost clearly, maybe for the first time, and they still don't know the exact moment where something actually changes. They understand the diagnosis. They've never been shown the door. So let's go find it, because there is an exact moment, not a gradual fade, not a slow improvement over years, where a person stops living from that flinch and starts living from somewhere else entirely. And once you see what that moment really looks like, you'll recognize it immediately, because you've almost certainly felt the edge of it before, without knowing what it was. Name the exact moment, not a phase, not a slow improvement you notice years later, looking back. A moment, specific enough that you could mark it on a calendar if you wanted to, because it happens the instant a person stops asking one question and starts asking a completely different one. Picture two seats. One is a seat in an audience, comfortable, dim, facing forward, built for watching something unfold that somebody else already decided. The other is a chair on the other side of the glass, facing the opposite direction, with a clear view of everything still waiting to be shot. 99% of people have spent their whole lives in the first seat without ever realizing there was a second one. They watch the scene of their own life arrive, react to it, maybe complain about the writing, and wait for the next scene to start. They call this dealing with what life gives you, and they say it like it's wisdom, when really, it's just a seating chart nobody questioned. The God state is what happens the instant someone gets up out of that audience seat and walks around to the other side of the glass. Same room, same light, completely different relationship to what happens next. That's what it sounds like, in the smallest, most ordinary terms. The audience seat question is, what is reality going to allow me to do today? It's a question that waits for permission. It scans the day for what's already been decided and tries to fit inside it. The director's chair question is different. Given what's actually in front of me right now, what am I going to create with it? Same day, same bill, same phone call, same tired morning. Completely different question standing behind it. This is not a trick of language. It's the entire hinge the God state turns on. Someone in the audience seat, staring at an unexpected bill, asks why this keeps happening to them. Someone in the director's chair, staring at that same bill, asks what it's asking them to build. A harder conversation they've been avoiding, a service they could offer, a boundary they've needed to set for a year. The bill didn't change, the chair did. And once you sit in that chair, even once, you notice something almost immediately. You stop negotiating with reality and start authoring it. You stop waiting to find out what happens and start deciding, on purpose, what you're bringing to the moment before it's even finished unfolding. That's the whole difference between the two seats. One waits to be told the story, the other writes the next line. That's also, finally, the honest answer to the question sitting underneath everything since the beginning. What if the number in that envelope was never actually in charge? What if you were, and nobody ever told you? The answer, as plainly as it can be said, you were never truly powerless in front of that number. You were sitting in the wrong seat, asking a question built for an audience member instead of a director. That's not the whole answer yet. There's more to how this really works, and we're going to get into exactly what changes inside a person once they make this move for real. But this is the door. It's the moment. Everything from here forward is what happens once you've walked through it. Because the moment you sit in that chair, something changes that you can genuinely notice. Not just in how you think, but in how your mind itself starts operating, moment to moment, underneath the thinking. Nobody plants a garden by kneeling in the dirt and begging it to produce tomatoes. That's not how growing anything has ever worked. A person chooses the seed, weeks or months before any harvest is possible, commits it to the ground on purpose, and tends it while there's still nothing visible to show for it. The choosing happens first. The evidence comes later, sometimes much later, and only because the choosing happened at all. That's exactly what it means to think in probabilities instead of certainties, which is the first thing that shifts once someone sits down in that director's chair. The audience seat mind thinks in fixed outcomes. This will happen, or it won't. Definite, binary, decided somewhere out of reach. The director's chair mind thinks differently. It asks which possibility, out of everything that could still happen, is worth choosing and tending before there's any proof it's coming. Not hoping it arrives, choosing it, the way you choose a seed, and then acting like the harvest is already underway, because in every way that matters to your behavior, it is. Picture what that looks like on an ordinary Tuesday. Someone facing a difficult financial decision doesn't spend 3 weeks turning it over, calculating every possible disaster it might lead to. They ask, plainly, which outcome they're choosing to plant their attention and effort into, and then they act from that choice immediately, instead of waiting for the fear to finish auditioning every alternative first. That single shift, choosing before the proof, instead of waiting for proof before choosing, is most of what separates someone stuck circling the same decision for months from someone who moves. Now here's where this gets even more interesting, because this same shift shows up somewhere else entirely, inside the mind itself, in a way you can notice happening in real time. Picture your own front porch at night. Inside the house behind you, a television is muttering away in another room. Background noise, running on its own, replaying the same handful of worries and old arguments it always replays, whether or not anyone's really listening. That's the mind on autopilot. the default chatter that fills the silence whether it's useful or not. Now picture the porch light itself, the kind wired to a motion sensor, dark and still until something actually worth noticing crosses its range, and then it snaps on, sharp and immediate. That's the part of your attention that notices what's relevant, a pattern, an opening, a person who just said something worth hearing twice. And then there's the third piece, the person who walks outside to see what triggered the light, instead of staying on the couch wondering about it. That's the part of you that decides and acts, without needing to replay the question 15 more times first. 3 parts, working together, and notice the God state difference. For the 99%, the television usually wins. It's louder, it's constant, and it drowns out the porch light half the time. So opportunities and patterns go unnoticed, simply because the background noise never quiets down long enough for the sensor to matter. For someone operating from the director's chair, the television quiets on its own, not through force, but because there's less unfinished business feeding it, less reacting left to replay, and the porch light gets to do its job. Patterns get noticed. What looks like coincidence to everyone else is often nothing more mysterious than a quiet mind finally able to see what was there all along. And the person who walks outside to check does it quickly, decisively, without the long committee meeting in their head that used to happen first. This is why people in the God state seem to decide faster and see further ahead than everyone around them. It isn't a special gift they were born with. It's what happens naturally once the background noise has somewhere less crowded to compete with, and the part of you, built to notice what matters, finally gets a clear signal to work with. But noticing the light isn't the whole picture, and it never was. The porch light only means something if it changes what you're putting out into the world while you're standing there, and that's the part almost nobody explains clearly, because it isn't about what you notice. It's about what you're broadcasting the entire time, whether you mean to or not. A dog in the room knows your mood before you've said a single word. Walk in carrying tension from a hard conversation, and the dog feels it in its body before you've set your keys down. Ears back, a little distance kept, a wariness that has nothing to do with anything you've said out loud. Walk in settled and clear, and the same dog meets you at the door without hesitation. Nobody taught the dog to do this. It's simply reading something real, something you're putting out into the room whether you intend to or not. Almost nobody explains this part clearly. People do it too. Not as sharply as a dog, maybe, but constantly, underneath conscious notice. The heart itself generates the strongest rhythmic electromagnetic signal the body produces, measurable, real, changing shape depending on what state a person is in. Walk into a negotiation carrying scattered, anxious static, and the other side feels something is off before you've finished your opening sentence, even if they couldn't tell you why. Walk in carrying settled, decided calm, and the room meets you differently. That's what the God state means by frequency. A real, physical state you're broadcasting, constantly, that other people and situations respond to, whether or not a single word gets said about it. So here is how you practice entering the God state, laid out in 4 layers, because knowing about it and living it are 2 completely different things. And this is where most people who only watch videos about it stop. The first layer is recognition. Before anything else happens each morning, before the phone, before the noise of the day gets a vote, Notice the state you're in. Not judging it, not fixing it yet, just naming it honestly. Tense, tired, hopeful, braced. You cannot deliberately choose a different state until you've honestly clocked the one you're already standing in. The second layer is sustaining a chosen frequency on purpose. Pick, before the first important thing happens today, the state you want to carry into it. Steady, decided calm, specific gratitude for something real. The quiet certainty of someone who already knows how this goes. Hold it, deliberately, for even 60 seconds, the way you'd hold a single note until it settles into the room. This is not pretending. It's choosing which signal you're going to broadcast before the day chooses it for you by default. The third layer is acting from that state at the first real opportunity. The phone call you've been putting off, the conversation with your adult child, the number you were going to ask for and talk yourself out of. Act from the chair, not the audience seat. The state you sustained in layer 2 is what you're bringing into the room with you now, and it changes what happens there more than almost anything you could say. The fourth layer is noticing, without demanding proof and without collapsing into disappointment if nothing dramatic shows up right away. Before bed, look for one sign. A conversation that went easier than expected. A coincidence. A moment of clarity that arrived out of nowhere. And let it count, without needing it to be enormous. This layer matters because it's where most people quietly quit. They try it for a day, nothing spectacular happens, and they decide it doesn't work. Practicing this is like walking into a gym for the first time. Nobody expects to lift the heaviest weight in the building on day 1. The point isn't the first day. The point is that you showed up. Put the 4 layers together, and it looks like this. You wake up and honestly notice you're anxious about a conversation you need to have later. You spend 60 seconds deliberately choosing and holding a state of grounded calm instead of letting the anxiety broadcast on its own. You have the conversation from that state, not from the flinch. And that evening, you notice it went better than you expected. Not perfectly, just better. And you let that count as a real result, not a coincidence to dismiss. Practice this for even a handful of days, and something in you starts to feel less negotiable, more solid. But there's a deeper layer to all of this, and it's the one that finally makes sense of something you've probably felt your whole life without having language for it. The moment you realize the limits you've been quietly working around were never laws to begin with. Every family has one. An unspoken rule that's been sitting at the dinner table for decades, never written down, never voted on, and somehow followed by everyone anyway. Money isn't discussed at the table. Certain topics stay outside the front door. Certain feelings get set aside until everyone's gone home. Nobody remembers deciding this. It simply became the rule, because it was the rule the last time, and the time before that, and eventually, it stopped feeling like a rule at all, and started feeling like a law of nature, until one day, a single person at that table simply stops following it. They bring up the topic. They ask the question everyone's been avoiding. And the strangest thing happens. The rule doesn't hold. It was never actually law. It was agreement, and agreement only works as long as everyone keeps agreeing. That's exactly what happens the moment someone practicing the God state runs into what feels, at first, like a wall. Because it will happen. The bill doesn't disappear the first week you practice this. The difficult relationship doesn't resolve itself in 5 days. And right there, at that exact moment, the old identity offers its favorite argument. See, this doesn't work. But that argument only sounds true if you were expecting a law to bend. What's really happening is an agreement starting to lose its grip, and agreements resist being questioned before they finally let go. That resistance isn't proof of failure. It's what it feels like when something learned starts coming undone. Look at 5 places this shows up, because naming them takes away most of their power. Money. The 99% treat scarcity as a law of nature. There's only so much, and it moves toward other people more than it moves toward you. But money has always been an agreement about value and exchange, negotiated and renegotiated by human beings, not handed down from the sky. The moment you stop treating it as fixed, you start noticing the places where you've been agreeing to less than what you're worth. Time. Treated like an enemy running out faster every year, when really, it's simply the structure inside which choices happen, not the choice itself. Someone in the director's chair still has exactly the same 24 hours as everyone else. What changes is that time stops being the excuse and starts being the material. The body, handed a diagnosis of fixed genetics, as though biology were a locked verdict with no appeal. The God state's correspondence here is direct. Deliberate attention and care participate in how your body expresses itself over time, the same way observation participates in what a particle becomes. The body is not a closed sentence. It's a living system, and it keeps responding, this year and the next, to how it's actually being cared for and attended to. Relationships. The 99% believe the right person has to be found, somewhere out there, through enough searching. Someone practicing the God state understands something quieter. The state you sustain changes who and what you attract into your field, because people respond to the frequency you're carrying far more than the profile you present. And social rules. It's too late once you're past 50. Repeated so often it starts to sound like law when it has always been consensus, an agreement that only holds power as long as enough people keep repeating it. The moment you stop repeating it, in your own life, it has no more authority over you than the rule about money at your family's dinner table. None of this becomes real by understanding it once and moving on. It becomes real the same way the old agreements became real in the first place, through repetition, until repetition becomes identity. That's the real difference between someone who understands the God state intellectually and someone who actually lives inside it. Not more information. A decision they keep making, quietly, every single day, whether or not anything dramatic is happening yet. Nobody gets excited about their first deposit into a savings account. It's too small to feel like anything. A few dollars, sitting there, doing nothing visible, while the rest of life keeps demanding attention. Most people who quit saving quit right there, in that flat, boring middle stretch where nothing seems to be happening. But money left alone doesn't stay flat. It compounds, quietly, underneath the surface, until one day, the person who kept depositing looks at the total and doesn't recognize it. The growth was never sudden. It was compounding the entire time. It just took long enough to become visible that most people gave up before they got to see it. Practicing the God state works exactly the same way, and understanding that difference is what finally separates believing from knowing. Belief sounds like this. I hope this works. Maybe it'll be different this time. Belief is honest, and it's not nothing, but it's still standing outside the door, waiting for permission to walk in. Knowing sounds different. Knowing says, this is already true, and I'm going to act like it, starting now, whether or not I've seen the proof yet. That's not arrogance, and it isn't denial. It's the same decision a person makes when they keep depositing into an account that isn't showing results yet. Not because they're certain of the exact date the growth becomes visible, but because they understand that compounding requires consistency more than it requires evidence. This becomes, unmistakably, a financial decision, and not only a spiritual one. Someone operating from belief negotiates timidly, because part of them still expects to be told no. Someone operating from certainty asks for what they're worth, takes the calculated risk they've been circling for months, starts the conversation about raising a rate or changing direction, not recklessly, but decisively, the way a person acts when they've already decided how this goes, instead of waiting to find out. That single difference, repeated across 100 ordinary decisions over a year, is the entire gap between a life that stays roughly the same and one that compounds into something unrecognizable. So the practice is this, and it's smaller than you might expect. On purpose, choose one single area of your life this week, not 5. 1. Money, health, a relationship, or work. Whichever one has been asking for your attention the longest. And for 7 days, practice the layers you already have. Recognize your actual state each morning. Deliberately sustain the state you're choosing to carry. Act from that chair, instead of the audience seat at the first real opportunity that shows up, and notice one sign each evening, without demanding it be dramatic. 7 days is where the compounding begins. The first small deposit landing exactly where you placed it. A conversation that went differently. A decision made faster and with less dread. A moment where you caught yourself reaching for the old flinch and chose the chair instead. That's not nothing. That's the beginning of compounding. And compounding is the only part of this that has ever mattered, in every area of a life worth living. And if the first few days feel like nothing at all, that's not a sign to quit. That's exactly what a first deposit is supposed to feel like. Small, quiet, almost forgettable, right up until the week it isn't. The people who never see the results are almost always the ones who stopped depositing the week before the total would have finally become visible. If you want to start today, pick your one area right now, before you finish watching this, and simply name it to yourself. That's the whole first step. Not a purchase, not a program, not 5 things. One decision, made quietly, that you're willing to keep making tomorrow, and the day after that. Because here's what nobody in the audience seat ever gets to see, since they're always waiting for proof before they're willing to commit. The compounding was always available. It was never reserved for people with more luck, more money to start with, or some special gift the rest of humanity was left out of. It only ever required one thing, repeated daily, long enough for it to stop being a practice and start being simply who you are. And once that happens, once the practice stops being something you do and becomes something you are, you're no longer approaching the God state from the outside, hoping to eventually earn your way in. You're already standing inside it, and what's left isn't more effort. It's remembering something you're about to realize you knew the entire time. Picture the mailbox again. The same one from the very beginning. The same unexpected bill. The same number that used to make the stomach drop before the eyes even finished reading it. Only now, someone opens that envelope from a different chair. The number is still there. Nothing about the paper changed. But the person holding it is no longer the one who spent a lifetime in the audience seat, waiting to find out what the day was going to do to them. They already know what they're bringing into this moment, because they chose it on purpose, before the mail ever arrived. The bracing is gone. In its place is a single, quiet question. What does this ask me to create? And for the first time in longer than they can remember, that question doesn't feel like a performance. It feels like the truth. No new theory, no new technique, nothing left to add. Just this, the answer to the question that opened everything. What if the number was never in charge? What if you were, and no one ever told you? Here it is, plainly, without a single ounce of mystery left in it. You were always the one in charge. Not because you're about to become something you weren't, because you were always the observer, always the one whose attention participated in what became real, always sitting closer to that director's chair than you ever knew. The 99% aren't missing a power the 1% were given instead. They're simply carrying an old case of amnesia, taught so early, repeated so often, that it started to feel like the truth about who they were. The 1% didn't acquire something new. They remembered something old. That's the real meaning behind everything you've heard in the last several minutes. The observer principle, the porch light, the seed chosen before the harvest, the frequency a room feels before you say a word, the family table rule that only ever held power because everyone agreed to keep holding it. None of it was ever about becoming someone different. It was about waking up to who was standing there the entire time, underneath the reacting, underneath the bracing, underneath every year spent waiting for permission that was never anyone else's to give. So here is what happens next, and it isn't complicated, even though nothing about it is small. Tomorrow morning, before the phone, before the noise gets its vote, you'll have the same choice available to you that's always been there. Slip into the seat that waits to be told what the day means, or walk around to the other side of the glass and decide. You already named your one area in the last few minutes: money, health, a relationship, work. That choice doesn't need to be perfect tomorrow. It only needs to be made again, the way it needs to be made every day after that, quietly, without an audience, without applause, the same way any real practice becomes identity. Through repetition, nobody sees until, one day, it's simply who you are. If you know which area you're choosing, say it. Not to prove anything to anyone watching, just to hear yourself commit to it out loud, or type it below, so tomorrow morning, it's already waiting for you instead of something you have to decide from scratch. That's the whole invitation. One area, one decision, repeated. Because the mailbox will keep arriving. The bills, the calls, the silences that used to mean everything and mean nothing at all. None of that stops. What stops is the amnesia. And once it stops, once you're standing on the other side of that glass for good, you'll understand the strangest part of everything you've just heard. You were never trying to enter the God state. You were only ever trying to remember that you'd never actually left it. The chair was always yours. Go sit in it.